times. We do this through Q&A, timely interviews, dramatic readings from the life of Holocaust survivor Zvi Kalisher, and of course, Bible teaching.
To learn more, visit foiradio.org.
Join us for Friends of Israel Today, Sunday morning at 11:30 Central on American Family Radio.
We've heard stories. There's prayer going on inside that White House.
There's prayer going on a regular basis in this White House. Whether it's public meetings or not, I've lost count of the number of times that the president's nudged me or nudged another member of the cabinet and said, let's start this meeting with prayer. It's not just on the National Day of Prayer.
Part of the problem the president has is he's dealing with ignoramuses, both inside his party and outside his party, and some of whom are dressed up as lawyers.
What is the Mueller investigation? What is it about? What exactly is Mueller investigating? Turns out almost nobody knows.
There's not a single criminal statute. There's not a single obstruction. What has been obstructed? They want to treat him like they treated Martha Stewart.
Government bureaucrats hate transparency. They'd rather do their work in secret. Secrecy is the shield that protects them from our scrutiny.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged. An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Every finger in the Focal Point studio pointed right at me, meaning it is time for me to start talking. And I will start, and I won't quit until somebody makes me.
And you have to use your Friday voice today.
My Friday voice? What's my Friday voice?
I don't know. It's just a little happier, a little...
I'm up. I'm feeling good.
A little more sarcastic, a little more fun, you know.
I told somebody this morning, my favorite four letters in the English language are T, G, I, and F. So,
except you almost said that yesterday morning. Remember, you came in thinking it was Friday.
It all messed up, and then Debbie, my wife, told me on the way out the door, said it's Friday. Thursday. Deb, why did you do that to me?
But today really is Friday.
I could have lived all day. I could have lived all day thinking it was Friday and enjoying all of the. Then gotten disabused at the end of the day, and then today would have really been great.
But look at the bright side. There's probably people out there driving around thinking it's Thursday today, and you just gave them a great day.
That's right. So there you go. It all helped them out. Yeah. Part of the reconciliation, North and South Korea, the North Koreans are setting their clocks back a half an hour to line up with the clocks in South Korea. Oh, wow. They both had changed their clocks a half an hour in response to the Japanese. The Japanese had set their clocks for them. They hated the Japanese because of what they did to them in World War II. So they changed their clocks a half hour just to spite the Japanese. South Koreans moved their clock back some time ago, and the North Koreans finally decided, so maybe this peace talk thing is going to wind up going somewhere.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's great trivial knowledge.
Yeah. I got another story about they're taking analog clocks, like the regular clocks with the minute hand, they're taking those out of all the schools in Britain because none of the kids can read them.
Yeah,
they have no idea how to read an analog clock.
I saw on the news today that the kids in the United States are being taught a class on how to read the clock.
Yeah, because everything's digital for them, and they have no idea.
Yeah, here's an idea. You're in school. Why don't you teach them how to read the clock?
Yeah, how come if you're They
had to create a special class.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So it's like they're no longer teaching the Navy, sailors in the Navy, how to use Morse code, because and they're not teaching them how to use a compass anymore, and kind of navigate by the North Star because they got all this digital. Well, what happens if that goes down?
Yeah,
All right. Well, let's turn our attention to the Word of God. You can find the schedule we're using at pray.afa.net. Pray.afa.net. Encourage you to bookmark that page, open it up as I do first thing in the morning, read the passage for the day in your own copy of the Word of God, and then pray that prayer back to God for people that you love. A prayer drawn from the very words of Scripture. Now, in chapter 6, we see two of the miracles of Christ, the feeding of the 5,000 and him walking on water. A couple of lessons I want to draw from each of these stories. Now, the feeding of the 5,000, as you're aware, took place on the other side of the Jordan River, the other side of the Sea of Galilee. This is actually in Gentile territory. but it was on the western side of the Sea of Galilee, the western side of the Jordan River. And there was huge crowds following Christ, and they followed him all the way to this meadow on the side of this mountain. 5,000 men were in this deal, so that means more people than that actually were there. So this large crowd followed him, and Jesus said to Philip, where did he say to Philip? He said to Philip, where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat? And it says he said this to test him. Now this is a reminder that what God will often do is he'll put us in a place where we're over our head. He said to these 12 disciples, I want you to feed these people. And they said it's impossible. We do not have what it takes to do what you are asking us to do. And I'm going to submit to you that Christ is going to do that to us more than once. He is going to deliberately put us, put you, put me in a place where the task just seems impossible. We think there's absolutely no way we can handle this responsibility. But look at the resources that we have, and we see, I just don't have what it takes. I don't have the training. I don't have the intellect. I don't have the education. I don't have the vocabulary. I don't have the experience to do this thing that God is clearly asking me to do. And then this is what he's teaching the disciples. When the time comes, God will supply you what you need to do the job. Now, there's a little boy that's at the center of this story. He had 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he donated the 5 loaves and the 2 fish to the 12. You know, Philip's out there doing calculations. 200 denarii, a denarius is a day's wage for a laborer. So that's 200. It says we could each work. We could work for 200 days, and we couldn't make enough money to buy just a little tiny piece of bread for all of this crowd. Now, this is Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said, look, there's a boy here, and he's got 5 loaves and 2 fish. But that's just a tiny little amount, and this is an absolutely huge crowd. And so Jesus said, well, have the people sit down. So they don't know what he's going to do. All they've got is 5 loaves and 2 fish. They got 5,000 people. So what Jesus does, and by the way, speaking of this little boy, here's a lesson here about this boy. Here's a boy that was generous. 5 loaves and 2 fish. That's all he had. That was his lunch. So these were small fish. These weren't big, giant Alaskan Chinook salmon, king salmon. These were little tiny fish because that's what they ate. Almost not a whole lot bigger than minnows. That's all he had. So that was his lunch that he had taken, his picnic lunch that he had taken to go watch Jesus. Got permission from his parents to do that and all of that business. And he generously donated it to the 12 disciples. I remember reading a story about a young boy. His sister needed a blood,
bone marrow?
No, it's just when you got to have you're short on blood.
Transfusion.
Is it a transfusion, even if it's a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
They call it a transfusion. Okay. Anyway, this boy, his sister needed a blood transfusion. And the doctor asked him, would you be willing to donate your blood so that your sister could get a transfusion? And he said, yes, I will. And so the doctor started to draw his blood, and he could see that tears were welling up in the boy's eyes. And the boy asked the doctor, when am I going to start to die? I mean, he genuinely thought that donating blood to his sister, he would have to give up his own life to do it. And of course, he found out he didn't, but he had that simple generosity. That's the same spirit of generosity that this boy had, willing to share. You know, when you think about this is a very simple little act of obedience, a very simple little act of generosity. You just never know what God can do with the simplest and smallest act of generosity and obedience on our part. People are still talking about what this boy did 2,000 years ago today. We're talking about it right now. So you just never know what God can do with a small, simple act of generosity. By the way, I'm going to pray on the other side of the break. So I think that's one lesson. Now, another thing, if you're there, you're part of the 5,000 and the feeding is taking place, here's a key thing to remember. We know where this came from. We know it came from Christ, who broke the bread and gave it to them in turn to give to the people. So who fed the 5,000? It was the disciples. The disciples were the one that actually fed the 5,000 with bread that they received from Jesus Christ. And that's a lesson for how our ministry is to take place. I'll finish that point up when we come back. Focal Point, American Family Radio.
Did you ever sit down to watch TV with your family only to turn it off because of bad language? TV Guardian is technology that mutes foul language in real time while you're watching television. TV Guardian was born out of the desire to watch a movie with the family without exposing children or adults to coarse or foul language existing in most of today's entertainment. The closed caption feature within all programming is used to look ahead, detect the offensive words, and mute them. Using simple level filters and sub-filters, TV Guardian can be used to filter content for your family. Religious references in mainstream programming are often offensive, using God's name in cursing. So TV Guardian offers filtering for those as well. More information is available at tvguardian.com/dish. tvguardian.com/dish.
American Family Radio is grateful for the support of TV Guardian.
And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. Acts 17:26 conveys to us the reality that we were born and placed in the 21st century by God's specific design. He determined before time where we would live and when we would live there. If you're in Minnesota, Mississippi, or Maine, God put you there on purpose. He's not surprised by the darkness we see around us, nor is he caught off guard by it. In fact, he specifically prepared for it by making sure you're alive right now. God can do whatever he wants, but he's chosen to use you and me as ambassadors of his kingdom. We are his torches to light up the darkness.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Howdy and welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. Free for all Friday. Talk about anything that's been in the news this week when we get to the phone call section. Talking about the Christ feeding of the 5,000. This is the only miracle, by the way, that's recorded in all four Gospels. So remember that this miracle, the 5,000 were actually fed by the disciples. Christ took the bread and the fish, he broke them, he gave it to the disciples. The disciples, in turn, were the ones that gave it to the hungry people. And that, I believe, is still the template for ministry today. We need, now, if you're going to get the bread you need to feed people. By the way, I had kind of a cute story with my son this week. He wanted to know what to get his mom for her birthday. So I talked to Debbie about it. And what she really wants, what she really loves to get from him is a pot of flowers. Now, JD doesn't know what to buy, and you can't ship them. So just send the money to Mom, and she'll go out. We'll go out together, and she'll buy a pot of flowers. And then every time she waters it, every time she takes care of them, she's going to think of you. She's going to think of Sarah. She's going to think of the boys and all that kind of stuff. So I told him, look, that's what we're going to do. So just send me some bread, and I'll buy the flowers. And I get a text back from him, bread, with 2 question marks. What is that? Now, when I use the word bread that way, Jeff, what am I talking about?
Money.
Rob, did you get that?
Oh yeah.
Send
money.
me some
Right
bread.
off the bat. Yeah.
And so I just laughed and I said, JD, man, I'm sorry. Did you know what that meant?
I would not have gotten that off the top of my head. Nope.
So I apologize. I said, JD, I apologize, man. I went all 70s on you. And he said, well, the word today is cheddar. Cheddar is not bread, it's cheddar.
Did you know that, Kelly?
So
cheddar?
I texted him back and I said, then send me some cheese, bro. Anyway, back to the actual bread story. But I believe this is still a template for the way God wants to minister today. You know, when I said the disciples, the only way they could feed the 5,000 is they had to be close enough to Jesus to receive from him what he wanted them to impart to the people in the crowd. So again, that's the secret to being able to have a personal ministry, is to be close enough to Christ, to walk close enough with Him, that we can receive from Him spiritual bread that we in turn can give to hungry people. So Christ is the one who is ministering through us, but He's not seen. Nobody sees Him there. They just see us ministering the bread of the Word of God to people. And that's a very personal thing. And I was listening to my wife, listening to Deb chatting with a friend who is in a bad spot. And Deb was talking to her on the phone. I was just listening to her, half of the phone call or part of it. And I listened to Deb talk about various passages of Scripture and what they meant, encourage her with those words from the Word of God, pray with her at the end. What was she doing? She was giving her friend the bread of life. She was feeding a hungry friend. Where did she get it? She got that from Jesus Christ. So that's the template for ministry. We hang out with Jesus, we get the bread of life, and we in turn can give that bread to hungry people around us. Now, the one last thing that happened in this section is Jesus walking across the water. The disciples were rowing back to Capernaum. The sea was rough. A strong wind was blowing. And the wind, basically, we know from other passages of Scripture, was blowing against them, and it was dark. It's the middle of the night. Now, here's the point. Here's the application of all of this. Jesus, in fact, we find out from the other Gospels, was going to walk right past them. He wasn't going to stop. He just wanted to make sure they were okay. But he could see they were slowly making progress, and so he was just going to let them keep laboring all night to get to the other shore. But they freaked out when they saw him. They caught his image, thought it was a ghost, and so Jesus goes over to them to reassure them. But here's the point. We can be in circumstances in our life, I've been there, you've been there, where it just seems that the atmosphere around us is dark. It seems like we are rowing against a very strong wind, against a very stiff wind. We're rowing with all of our might. We're barely making progress. And it's at that point that Jesus says to us what He said to the disciples, "It is I," literally, I am, "do not be afraid." So remember that the next time you're in a dark place where the wind is against you, you're running out of strength because you've been rowing the best you can, never forget that the great I am is with you in the darkness and with you on that stormy and wind-tossed lake. Well, let us go to prayer, if you'd be kind enough to join me. Lord Jesus, we accept the truth of what we read here, that you were able to feed a crowd of 5,000 men with just 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. We believe that you were able to walk on water and instantly transport the disciples and their boat to shore. These works bear witness to the truth that you are the prophet Moses prophesied would come into the world. We bow before you as the once and coming King. I pray for the listening audience of Focal Point. I pray for my family. I pray for the families of our listening audience. I pray for every man, woman, and child in this land, for our mayors, for our governors, and for President Trump. And I pray that we will all learn from this story that little is much when you are in it. We often feel, along with Philip and Andrew, that what we have to offer is hopelessly insufficient for the demands we face. May we offer the little we have to you and believe that with that little, you are able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or even imagine, according to your power that is at work within us. There are times, Lord, when we feel as the disciples must have felt when they set off across the lake for Capernaum. Things seem dark, and we do not sense your presence with us. The wind seems strong and contrary, the waves rough, and our progress seems agonizingly slow, even though we are rowing with all of our strength. I pray that you will come to us at those times and manifest your presence to us. May we worship you as the great I am and learn that we do not need to be afraid as long as you are with us. I pray that you will invite us into, we will invite you into our lives as the disciples invited you into their boat, and believe that your supernatural power can bring us to every place you want us to go. This we pray in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, I don't know where to start. I'm just stacked, packed, and locked and loaded, completely jammed up.
I could start with a kind of a Friday-type story.
Okay, hit me.
Do you mind? Apparently, this gentleman in Massachusetts had planned out an elaborate shoplifting kind of scheme, and he used Play-Doh to cover the cameras and over the electronic devices and stuff.
Cameras and all that stuff, okay.
One problem. Play-Doh is an excellent thing for leaving fingerprints. So they got perfect fingerprints off of everything, and they arrested the guy, a 55-year-old.
Just gave him his fingerprints.
Yeah, I didn't think that through.
Yeah, and not...
yeah, it seemed like a good idea at the time.
At the time. Not one of the world's smartest criminals. Well, I can match that Friday story. Well, here's one of my Friday stories was the analog clocks are useless in the UK. We've already been over that. Here you go. Here's one. We're getting started early on the Friday stories, but I'm feeling in a good mood, so let's rock and roll. Now, this is a homeless guy in California, and this guy somehow managed to file a lawsuit. He's homeless. A lawsuit that got to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in his favor. Now, the issue was whether his civil rights, his constitutional rights were violated because the city of Los Angeles euthanized 18 of his pet pigeons. He's homeless. He's living on the street. He makes up these little cardboard houses for these pigeons, had 18 of them that were there. But the city health officials examined these pigeons and said, look, they've got diseases. We've got to take care of them. They actually represent a risk to human health, so they euthanized them. And this homeless man, how does a homeless man know enough to get to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals? I don't get that. But anyway, they said he's
take
got
money?
Yeah, I mean, well, he must have represented himself unless somebody did this pro bono. He actually had 20 pet birds, 18 pigeons, a crow, and a seagull housed in a dozen or so cardboard cages and boxes. But the authorities found that the newspaper lining the bottom of the cages was soaking wet. The containers were covered in bird droppings, and the birds didn't have room to fly around. Many of the pets were in dire physical condition. So they took these pigeons away from the man, and they euthanized them to protect public health, and he's suing them for that. Found another story here about, remember we had that issue with Starbucks and the two guys going in there, and they accused these guys of loitering.
Yeah.
You guys are sitting in there. They were waiting for somebody to show up, but they were accused of loitering because they weren't going to buy anything till their friend showed up, and they got asked to leave, and they sued, and they got, by the way, $1. Each of them got $1 in damages from Starbucks. They got $200,000 for their favorite charity, but they got $1. So I was thinking, man, let's go in and shake down Starbucks. That's an easy way to make $1. Yeah. Literally go in there. Anyway,
I won't even buy you a cup of coffee at Starbucks.
No, it won't. It
about
will not.
$2.18 or something like that.
Now this is what 7-Eleven has done to solve that problem. They've figured out how to keep people from loitering around 7-Elevens. They play classical music and operas, and they crank it up full volume. And these guys just run to the street screaming. So but they just can't stand. This is in Modesto, California. They can't stand to listen to classical music pumped up at high volume. And the customers are telling the owner they feel a lot safer since he started playing the classical music and the occasional symphony and occasional opera over the outdoor speakers. Manuel Souza says once the music started, the riff-raff left. The loud music makes it hard to hang out and gossip and joke around near the store. Another method employed at some stores is a device that emits a high-pitched screech similar to a mosquito buzzing in your ear. Clerks turn the device on and off as needed. All right, so that's the latest technique for dispersing loiterers.
Yeah, we could also always put Hillary Clinton on a loop.
That's right, we could.
For sure.
Now, here's the story. You pet lovers are going to love this. I liked it myself. There's a cat named Pepper. Now, this cat, his owner was flying from JFK back home to China, and Pepper got out of his little carrier, and they didn't find him for 8 days. Took them 8 days to track down little Pepper. He was in the terminal's interior superstructure that's not accessible to humans. Anyway, spotted several times. They finally laid out a little trap. Let's see. And the cat recognized the voice of a worker that was a friend of his owner, and they're going to get the cat back to its owner.
This is Dr. Richard Land, president of Southern Evangelical Seminary. Welcome to Bringing Every Thought Captive. Yesterday was the National Day of Prayer. I hope you attended an event near your home, school, or workplace. The National Day of Prayer was officially created in 1952 by the U.S. Congress and signed into law by President Truman. But Americans throughout our history, from the colonial Puritan days up through the Revolution, the Civil War, and World Wars I and II, have been called by American leaders and presidents to days of prayer, to pray for divine intercession and blessing in times of great crisis. For example, Franklin Delano Roosevelt spent most of the afternoon and the early evening of June 6, 1944, composing a prayer. He led the nation in praying that night as part of his fireside chat national address to the nation as he announced the D-Day landings at Normandy that day as the Allies began the liberation of Europe from Nazi tyranny. President Roosevelt led the nation to, quote, the throne of grace, end quote. And so, Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, Roosevelt prayed, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity. Lead them straight and true. Give strength to their arms, stoutness to their hearts, steadfastness to their faith. And for us at home, fathers, mothers, children, wives, sisters, and brothers of brave men overseas, help us, Almighty God, to rededicate ourselves in renewed faith in Thee in this hour of great sacrifice. End quote. For more information about Southern Evangelical Seminary, or how you can download the free mobile SES app, go to ses.edu. This is Richard Land.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio. Listen to the audio podcast or download today's program at afr.net. You can also read Brian Fisher's columns at afa.net. afa.net.
Howdy, welcome back to Focal Point. This is Brian Fisher. The program is Focal Point Network, the American Family Radio Network. Got an interesting thing that happened in the Trump investigation deal. A federal judge on Friday, that would be today, this is breaking news, asked pointed questions about special counsel Robert Mueller's authority to bring charges against former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort. And the judge suggested something you've heard us talk about here every day on Focal Point. This is a federal judge. He's dinging the prosecutor, Mueller, and his gang of whatever, gang of 16, suggesting that their true motive is to get Manafort so that with using Manafort, they can get the president. In other words, he busted these guys down. Your goal here is not justice. Your goal is to get the president. His name is Judge T.S. Ellis III. He's a senior judge. I don't see what relationship this indictment, it's a bank tax and bank fraud charge against Manafort. I don't see what this indictment has to do with what the special counsel is investigating. He went on to say that defense lawyers are naturally concerned that defendants in this situation will not only sing but compose, meaning they will start making up facts. So this federal judge, on to something that you and I have been recognizing for a considerable amount of time, that this is just, I call it a snipe hunt. You know, a witch hunt, there could actually be a witch out there. But a snipe hunt, there ain't no snipe out there. But you still get these gullible people convinced that there's a snipe out there, and you're out there on the beach in the middle of the night with a little paper bag waiting for that thing to run into your bag, and there's nothing out there.
That's why I never got one.
Yeah.
Now I know.
He's been going on snipe hunts his whole life. And he now finally believes what we've been telling him. It's a very rare bird, very unusual. Actually, there are real snipes, actually. But anyway, let's grab some clips here and get started with that. And Kelly, we never did find anything on that WGN source tape where they're talking about, okay.
Not directly, no.
This is interesting. I want to play clip number R1. This is from WGN. It flagged a Google alert. Apparently, these two people talked about me at some point. WGN is probably the biggest radio station in Chicago, and apparently they had talked about me at some point, but we couldn't find it. But they did talk about Judge Roy Moore, and I was reminded listening to these two people that are just raw pagans. These people just frown on us. They think that we are something that you scrape off the bottom of a shoe. But anyway, they're talking here about the First Amendment. They were talking about things that I had said somewhere in here about the First Amendment just applying to Christianity. And so they start talking about that issue. And it's interesting who they bring up that they indicate actually agrees with me. Let's listen.
Let's go back to this First Amendment Christianity thing. Because
I can't talk a lot about that because I just kind of saw the headline and barfed and then read and kept going.
That's all right. I've got this here MSNBC story pulled up, and I will. There are some quotes I would like to share.
Okay.
Because they are where I'm from, what we like to call crazy.
Okay, I'm going to barf more now.
Okay, so Alabama Chief Justice offered an unusual interpretation of the U.S. Constitution in a newly released video, telling a religious organization that the First Amendment only protects Christianity. Here we go. Ready? They didn't bring the Koran over on the Pilgrim ship, the Mayflower, Chief Justice Roy Moore announced at the Pastor for Life luncheon, which I'm not sure why we weren't invited to that, Hupke. An event hosted in January by Pro-Life Mississippi. Oh, that's why we were not invited.
Yeah.
In a video obtained and released by Raw Story last Friday, Moore told his audience that religion in the First Amendment only applied to the God in the Bible. Let's get real. Let's learn our history. Let's stop playing games, said Moore at the Jackson, Mississippi event. Ah, that's so nice. That's nice. Buddha didn't create us. Muhammad didn't create us. It's the God of the Holy Scriptures, said Moore.
Good Lord.
Okay. That's nice.
So you just sense the condescension just dripping off of these folks, when they talk about Mississippi. Again, just playing into the stereotype that Mississippi's backwards. And by the way, you know, Mississippi, there was a time when Mississippi had the least educated workforce in the country. Do you know who has the least educated workforce in the country now? It is California. And Mississippi will never, ever in our lifetimes catch up with California. Do you know why California has the least educated workforce in the entire country? Because of illegal immigration. They've got so many people living in California now that are functionally illiterate in every language. They're not literate in their own language, and they don't know a word of English. So they now have the least educated workforce, far worse, far lower than Mississippi, and Mississippi will never catch up to them. They are going to have the least educated workforce for our entire lifetimes. Now, so just dripping with condescension, but it's interesting to me. You heard these people quoting Roy Moore that he believes that the First Amendment applies only to Christianity. Judge Roy Moore, the Ten Commandments judge. This guy's probably the fiercest and most faithful jurist, most faithful to the Constitution of any judge in America. He's been bounced twice because of his fidelity to the Constitution as it was written by the Founding Fathers. You know who else believes that the Constitution, the First Amendment, applies only to Christianity? Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin of the Family Research Council. He also believes that the First Amendment only applies to Christianity, or does not apply to Islam anyway. He says Islam, for purposes of the Constitution, is not even a religion. It's a totalitarian ideology, and just like we ban communists from the United States, you can't migrate to the United States if you believe in communist ideology because it's totalitarian. So Muslims believe in a totalitarian ideology can be banned from America for exactly the same reason. So anyway, there's at least three people in America that believe that the First Amendment applies only to Christianity: Brian Fisher of Focal Point, Judge Roy Moore, and Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin of the Family Research Council. Now, let's move on down the roster of sound bites. Let's grab clip number R3. A lot of these deal with the Mueller investigation. Here's Andy McCarthy. This guy's a brilliant legal scholar. I try to read everything that he writes, and he's weighing in on this whole business of Mueller requesting or even demanding. I mean, he's going to issue a subpoena demanding that President Trump show up and be interrogated by his gang of goons. This is what Andy McCarthy says about that.
They should not, at the Justice Department, allow Mueller to even request an interview unless they can show that there's a serious crime, that President Trump is somehow complicit in it, and that President Trump has information that the special counsel can't get from any other source. If they can't show those things, the Justice Department should not allow Mueller even to request an interview.
So the Justice Department, remember, Robert Mueller is working for the Justice Department. He's not a free agent. I mean, he is a free agent because Rod Rosenstein, I don't think, has enough testosterone to actually supervise him or to rein him in or to channel him. So Mueller is a completely renegade, rogue free agent out there roaming anywhere that he wants to go. But Mandy McCarthy's point is, look, the DOJ, even if Mueller were to try to ask President Trump for an interview, the DOJ ought to intervene and tell the DOJ or tell Robert Mueller, no, you cannot do that. Now, Mark Levin, clip number 2 now, skipping over the Pence clip. This is Mark Levin talking about what he would do if he were the president's lawyer in this case. Let's listen.
I would say if I were the president's lawyer to Mr. Mueller, we want you to present us with an explanation of your defiance of the Department of Justice policy, which you are required to follow as an employee of the Department of Justice. Moreover, we want to understand how it is that you believe that you can burden a president like this while he's in office. And while I'm at it, Sean, we seem to have a few Republicans in the Senate who are very confused about these things, who have voted to protect Mr. Mueller rather than protect the office of the presidency, the Constitution, and the American people. And they seem to think that they have the power, even though we have separation of powers, to tell a president who he can hire and who he can fire.
So Mark Levin talking about the confusion about the Constitution in the minds of our legislators, our elected officials in the Senate. They apparently do not understand the separation of powers. This is ridiculous that they would try to craft legislation that would prevent the president from firing Robert Mueller. They have no constitutional right to do that. They cannot tell the president who to hire and who to fire. He is in charge of the executive branch of the government. Why? Because the Constitution says he is. The Constitution gives no authority to Congress to order the president to do or not to do anything. So that's what Mark Levin would do if he were the president's attorney. He would put the pressure on Mueller to justify what in the world he is doing. And again, he points out, Levin did, that the Republicans bent over backwards to try to protect Mueller rather than protect the president, who was the leader of their own party. Now here is clip number 2, Mark Levin.
Part of the problem the president has is he's dealing with ignoramuses, both inside his party and outside his party, and some of whom are dressed up as lawyers. So I would take this all the way to the United States Supreme Court. I would make Mueller and his band of Democrat prosecutors make their case all the way to the United States Supreme Court. If they try to subpoena him in any way to appear before a federal grand jury, and make them make their case against their own Department of Justice, against Supreme Court precedent, and against the Constitution of the United States. And when you look at those 49 areas of questions, there's not a single criminal statute. There's not a single obstruction. What has been obstructed? They're not investigating Russia. They want to know his intent on whether he obstructed. They want to treat him like they treated Martha Stewart. Well, guess what? He's the president, Mr. Mueller. This isn't one of your failed anthrax cases or one of your failed Whitey Bulger cases. This is the president of the United States. You know what that means? We, the people, have a stake in this. We, the people, get to decide. The framers decided the only way you remove a president is through the body politic, through the House and the Senate, and it's a heavy burden, not by some rogue prosecutor with a bunch of Democrat prosecutors. They don't get to do it, and the people need to rise up and demand that this go all the way to the Supreme Court to put these rogue prosecutors in their place.
Now, you think I'm playing that soundbite for you. I'm not. I'm playing it for the executive producer of this program. So the executive producer has an example of what I could sound like if I let myself go. Anyway, good for Mark Levin. Back with your calls.
You wish you could stop thinking about it, but you can't. It never quite leaves your thoughts. Even in the joyful moments, it's there. The sadness, shame, and sorrow. You know you can't go on like this, so don't. Phone the International Helpline for Abortion Recovery at 866-482-LIFE. Your call is confidential, and you'll be talking with someone who's already been where you are and found the way out. 866-482-LIFE.
The AFA Journal helps you stay in touch with issues of the day. Articles by award-winning writers open your eyes with different perspectives. Shorter pieces document current trends. You'll find monthly columns by financial expert Dan Celia and AFA President Tim Wildman. Even the ads put you in touch with various AFA departments and other ministry organizations. Subscribe to the AFA Journal and stay up to date on the American Family Association and the Culture War when you visit afajournal.org.
Hi, this is Steve Tiber with 8 Days of Hope. We've seen God open up so many doors for us to help serve and love those who get affected by a natural disaster.
As the trees and the wind started crashing down around us, my wife was, of course, very diligently praying, Lord, please be with us.
Very simply, we do it because God commands us to love others.
I see these volunteers all as a gift from God.
And I'm just grateful they're here, helping out is a blessing.
If you're interested in becoming a part of what God's doing through 8 Days of Hope, please go to 8daysofhope.com, click on Get Involved, submit your email address.
I've noticed that whenever there's a time in my life when things might be a little gloomy, the number one thing that I can do is to go serve somebody.
And I would encourage anyone else to, it's worth it. Come out and do it next time if you didn't make it to this one, and the Father will really bless you in it.
Thank you so much for your prayers and volunteering with 8 Days of Hope.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Howdy, welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio. It's free for all Friday. The number to call in, the number to use to call is 888-589-8840. 888-589-8840 is the number to call to talk about anything that's been in the news this past week. We've talked about how social media is involved in censorship. Here's a note from Jamie Glazov. I don't know him. I don't know him personally. I know a little bit about him. He is a conservative that monitors the threat from Islam. He got suspended by Twitter for violating their rules against hateful conduct. You know what he did to get banned from Twitter? He quoted the Quran. Oh, wow. And the hoopleheads at Twitter didn't even realize that he was quoting Islamic scripture, and they banned him for hate speech. So that gives you an idea of what's in the Quran. And he finally got when he explained to them what they'd done, and he violated, he also quoted from the Hadith. These are the sayings of Muhammad, the teachings that came directly from the lips of Muhammad. And he quoted something from the Hadith, and they banned him for those two things. He's been reinstated because they had no idea that that his words contained the very words of the Quran. Number to call is 888-589-8840.
May I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
What is a hooplehead?
I knew you were going to do that. I looked it up. It says it's not a common American slang term, but it's probably been given more exposure. Some kind of a series it was on.
It was on HBO.
It refers to a foolish, ridiculous person.
Foolish,
Wow.
ridiculous person has a hoople head.
I thought he just made it up.
Well, it may not be well known now, but by the time I get through with it, it's going to be on the lips of everybody in America. All right, let's go to Joshua in Oklahoma. Joshua, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hey, Brian. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Just going back a little bit to Tuesday with the Wiccan prisoner story.
Yes.
I've listened to you almost religiously for the last 4 years. Now, that was one day I missed a little bit, and it was recently brought up to me on someone insisting that you're, another one of those hateful bigots and all that. They say that, or they quoted you from Tuesday, and I'd since watched it. Now, I'm not sure if there was just if there was a misspoken or what, but I was just hoping you can maybe try to clarify. Every time I've heard you talk about the freedom of religion, it's all, you believe it's for Christianity, which I understand that. I've heard everything, but then there's a few times where it's come up where you don't specify the freedom of religion. You leave you say the entire First Amendment was only meant for Christians. So I was just wondering if you meant that, or if you could clarify one way or another, if you were just mainly referring to the freedom of religion and not press, assembly, all that stuff.
No, I was just talking about the freedom of religion. The guarantees for the free exercise of religion was specifically for Christianity. The other rights that are spelled out there, those are for everybody. And the other thing you got to realize, at the time of the founding, Joshua, everybody in America was a Christian. I mean, 98.4% of the people in America were Christians. 1.4% were, what were 1.4%?
Jewish?
No, I don't know if they were Jewish or not. No, only 0.2% were Jewish. I forget. I can't remember what the they were Roman Catholics.
Oh.
So 98.4% of the population of America at the time of the founding were Protestants. 1.4% were Roman Catholics, which is a strain of Christianity, and 0.2% were Jewish. So 99.8% of the population at the time of the founding were Christians. So the rights and the rest of the First Amendment apply to everybody, but everybody was a Christian at that time. But Joseph Story makes it clear that the freedom of religion plank, that specific part of the First Amendment, was just for Christians. Joseph Story says this: the real object of the First Amendment was not to countenance, much less to advance Mohammedanism or Judaism or infidelity, atheism, by prostrating Christianity, but to exclude all rivalry among Christian denominations, Christian sects. In other words, it was about Christian sects or Christian denominations, and to prevent any national ecclesiastical patronage of the national government. That is, to have one denomination identified as the official church of the United States. All right, Joshua, thank you for the call. Let's grab a call from Mary in Kansas. Mary, welcome. What's on your mind?
Well, I just have a question, and I know I got it from American Family Radio, but I don't know which program, but there have been several Democrats all of a sudden in this mid-election coming up changing their mind about, well, President Trump doesn't need to be impeached and all that, and I do believe that he should not be impeached, but what I'm afraid of is that they're just trying to do kind of a cover-up to protect their office and to keep their voters voting for them so they don't lose their seat where they're at. And I just feel like it's kind of like they're trying to pull the wool over their the people that usually vote for them. They're maybe angry with them for what they're doing, which they should be. And we even have a few Republicans doing the same thing to President Trump. So I was just wondering what you thought about the ones that are making a statement all of a sudden saying, let's don't impeach him. And do you feel like they're just doing it as a in-between act just to keep their seat in their office?
Well, Mary, I think the question you're asking is an extremely perceptive question, and I don't have an answer to it, but I'm with you. It's been rolling around inside my head. I'm kind of suspicious of the fact that all these Democrats at the same time seem to be coming to the same conclusion. So just like you, it tells me there's something behind that. There's something strategic that's behind that. They're saying that for some political reason. I don't know exactly what it is. You know, yours is as good a guess as anything that I've got. But let's keep thinking about that. I think eventually we're going to see what the strategy is there. You've got Democrats running in states where Donald Trump won decisively in 2016, and they may realize, look, I do not want to get afoul of the voters in my own state. So even though I'm a Democrat running as a Democrat, I can't paint myself as an enemy of Donald Trump like I used to, because I got a lot of people in the state that voted for him where he won decisively in some of those states. So that may be it. Anyway, I'm going to keep thinking about that, Mary, and we'll see what we come up with. Anyway, very perceptive question. Thank you. Let's go to Lee in Mississippi. Lee, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hey, guys. Happy Friday. Thanks for having me on. I just wanted to comment and say how grateful I am that you just played that last sound clip about the guy saying that, we need to really get off President Trump and his whole witch hunt. I mean, we look at how great a job he's doing with the unemployment rate and the economy. And even one thing I think that has flown underneath the radar is his really destruction of ISIS. I think personally, I can remember before he was elected how almost personally fearful I was of, a real terrorist attack maybe happening here close to home. But now that he's really taking advantage of that, or really taking control of the situation, I mean, he's doing such a good job. So if, the enemies that he has, the people kind of trying to come against him, we could just lay off and let him do his job, I really think that we could see more success than even what he's having now. So I appreciate y'all, and I thank y'all for having me on.
Okay, good point. Thank you very much. And Lee's got a good point about the economy. The employment rate is down under 4%. This is like a historic breakthrough. I don't think it's ever been this low since they started tracking the unemployment rate. But the media's not talking about that. They're trying to bury that. They're hoping you don't even notice that. Another 133,000 jobs created last month, something like that. So the news regarding the economy continues to be good, but the media does not want you to know that. Let's go to Kent in Indiana. Kent, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hey, Brian. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's Friday.
It is. So what's
up?
What
I wanted to comment. Go ahead. What I wanted to comment about was, I'm sure you remember, a few days ago, a lady had called in, and you were talking about the homosexual agenda.
Uh-huh.
And she said she was a Christian, and that overall she didn't see anything wrong with it, as long, it wasn't affecting her, as long as it was two consenting adults, that she didn't think it affected anyone else. And I guess I disagree, mainly because especially if your government is approving the lifestyle and approving the marriage and everything else, to me that brings us as a country further away from God, and I think that affects us, everybody.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think it's a very good point, Kent, and that's one of the reasons why, what George Washington said, of all the habits and dispositions that make for political prosperity, religion and morality are the indispensable supports. In other words, he said you can't have political prosperity, you can't have the kind of nation you want apart from religion, by which he meant Christianity, and morality, by which he meant the Ten Commandments. And homosexuality is clearly proscribed in the Ten Commandments because the sin there that's specified is adultery. Sleeping with somebody that you're not married to. And, of course, in the biblical world, the only person you could marry was an adult member of the opposite sex. And so, again, it has to do with the quality, the moral fiber, the character of our country, the moral character of our country. And you're exactly right, Kent. That's one of the reasons why those moral issues are very, very important, because they're critical to the moral character of our country. And it is the moral character of our country that's going to determine our future, whether it's prosperous or not. Let's grab a call from Dickie in Georgia very quickly. Dickie, got about 30 seconds. Hit me with your best shot.
Yeah, Brian, there's a guy in Montgomery, Alabama. His name's Brian Stevenson. He's took it upon himself to put up this museum representing people that were lynched back in the day.
Yeah.
I don't understand. They're talking out of both sides of their mouth. They want to take down the Confederate statues because it reminds them of slavery and lynching. But now we're putting museums up, and Washington and in Montgomery to remind us of slavery and lynching. I don't understand.
Well, Dickie, that's a very profound observation. We'll let people mull on that over the news break. Thanks, Dickie, for the call. Great insight. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Focal Point, American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
You can be among the first to receive updates about changes and special events coming up in our programming, and always keep up with the things you might have missed with American Family Radio's weekly newsletter. Every Friday, you'll receive an email with a recap of the week's highlights from your favorite broadcasts, as well as important information about special programs in the near future. Add yourself to our mailing list at afr.net.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. There's an update on the federal agent shot overnight in Chicago. He's expected to live. Jeff Manasso has the latest.
The ATF agent came under what's described as a barrage of bullets around 3:15 this morning and rushed to the hospital. We were told in critical condition. That's been upgraded.
He is currently in stable condition. He is anticipated making a full recovery.
The ATF says the agent was shot in the face while investigating illegal guns in the back of the Yards neighborhood on the city's southwest side, a hotbed for gangs and crime. At this point, we're also told no arrests have been made. In Chicago, Jeff Manasso, Fox News.
A man accused of voter fraud is in jail.
DNA and fingerprints led to the arrest on Wednesday. Just before the 2016 presidential election, some people in Altamont Springs, Florida, complained they didn't get their absentee ballot in the mail. 5 of those ballots were cast, though, by someone with signatures that didn't match the registered voters. The Seminole County Supervisor of Elections turned those ballots into police, and saliva and fingerprints from the envelopes is now matched to a man named Brett Warren, 36 years old, not a registered voter. Who did he vote for all those times? Well, we don't know. That elections official says the ballots were still sealed when he turned them over. The real voters were allowed to cast provisional ballots in that election. Chris Foster, Fox News.
One of the nation's most respected and successful Supreme Court advocates has been kicked out of the Amazon Smile program. Chris Woodward tells us why.
Alliance Defending Freedom says it was kicked out of the Amazon Smile charitable program after Amazon used discredited information from the Southern Poverty Law Center. Greg Baylor, Senior Counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom.
Amazon runs a charitable program on its website. It's called Amazon Smile, and through that, people who are using Amazon to buy things can make a small charitable contribution. Amazon has a list of charities that they deem eligible to participate in the program, and ADF has long participated in the program until recently, when Amazon decided that it would no longer allow ADF to be a recipient of charitable contributions. Why did it do this? It did this because they relied upon the discredited Southern Poverty Law Center, an organization that's really just a fundraising propaganda outfit, fills its ever-increasing coffers by attacking veterans, Catholics, Muslims who oppose terrorism, and even nuns. So we're calling on Amazon to change its mind about this and to stop relying upon the SPLC.
I'm Chris Woodward.
A battle royale is ahead in the race for governor of Massachusetts, and as Charlie Butts reports, God will be well represented.
In a stunning series of events, Dr. Scott Lively, a strong conservative, has won a place on the ballot in the Republican primary for governor of Massachusetts, which has been dominated by liberals for years. Lively says the state has turned to Marxism.
The hard left has gotten control of our country, and especially here in Massachusetts, they've flipped everything on its head. They're now running a basically totalitarian regime with all power centered in Beacon Hill, dictating all the citizens how they should live and what they should do according to Marxist values, not American values.
Lively also tells AFN he gives all the glory to God for his victory, and that's the center point of his candidacy.
I'm an unswerving, unshakable follower of Jesus Christ. I am not ashamed of the gospel. I'm not ashamed to speak plain truth from a biblical worldview and perspective, and I think God honors that and is going to pour out his favor on what we're doing.
Although Massachusetts is controlled by liberals, there is a significant conservative population that Lively says has become energized because they now have a candidate that represents their values. The election is set for November 6th. I'm Charlie Butts.
The nation's unemployment rate has fallen to 3.9% as employers added 164,000 jobs in April, a lower number than experts predicted. The Labor Department revised the number of jobs added in March upward to 135,000. Average hourly earnings rose 2.6% from a year ago. American Family News is online at onenewsnow.com. I'm Rusty Pugh.
Who is God? What is he like? How can we know? Your answer to these questions will impact your worship, discipleship, apologetics, and evangelism. Learn from Ravi Zacharias, Josh McDowell, Chip Ingram, and more than 60 other speakers at Southern Evangelical Seminary's 25th Annual National Conference on Christian Apologetics. It's October 12th and 13th in Charlotte, North Carolina. Get the early bird discount when you register by August 1st at ses.edu.
We've heard stories. There's prayer going on inside that White House.
There's prayer going on a regular basis in this White House. Whether it's public meetings or not, I've lost count of the number of times that the president's nudged me or nudged another member of the cabinet and said, let's start this meeting with prayer. It's not just on the National Day of Prayer.
Part of the problem the president has is he's dealing with ignoramuses, both inside his party and outside his party, and some of whom are dressed up as lawyers.
What is the Mueller investigation? What is it about? What exactly is Mueller investigating? Turns out almost nobody knows.
There's not a single criminal statute. There's not a single obstruction. What has been obstructed? They want to treat him like they treated Martha Stewart.
Government bureaucrats hate transparency. They'd rather do their work in secret. Secrecy is the shield that protects them from our scrutiny.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Howdy, welcome back to the second hour of Focal Point. You guys stop doing that.
All right.
I don't know. I got my team here in the studio. That'll teach me to bring everybody into the studio at one time.
Yeah, you got us in a Friday mood.
Friday mood. They're trying to look like they're fishing and throwing their reel out there and then catching me. And
we're getting better at it, too. Yeah, we're practicing every time.
Yeah, well, you're sinking your hooks into me pretty deep. Anyway, second hour Focal Point. Glad you are with us. Got a slight correction to make. Employment has fallen to the lowest rate since 2000 in April. I added 164,000 jobs in that month.
What is it, 3.9?
3.9%.
But also, I believe what I just read as you were talking about that, I looked something up, and it matches 2000, but I think it's the lowest sustained rate, like over a more significant period of time since late 1960s.
All right. Because the unemployment rate has been down there, pushing downward almost every month, so it has been a sustained deal. Overseas, the crime rate in the UK is escalating. It's skyrocketing. British voters more concerned about crime than at any point since 2011. The reason for this has to do, the explanation is two words. It's Muslim immigration. That's the reason for the increase in violence in the UK. Now, you're not going to find that in the UK press. You're not going to find that anywhere in the American press, but that is the explanation. Let's grab a call from Joe in Mississippi. Joe, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hi, I wanted to call on homosexuality being a sin.
Yes, sir.
I definitely agree homosexuality is a sin, and we know that. Now this leads me to a point that we make, and that is that they are not born homosexual. They say they are. They're born this way, but they're not born homosexual. It's a sin, and sin is the transgression of the law. But that leads me to point out two passages. I'm at James chapter 1, verses 13 through 15. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin when it is finished bringeth forth death. So we see that pattern established right there. It was actually established originally in Genesis chapter 3. We see verse 6, and when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. So we see right there, we see in both those instances, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. My point is that tells us that we are not born in sin either. We also have to do the same thing that Adam, Eve, and the homosexuals do to be sinners. We can't be born in sin if they can't. That's all I had to say.
Okay, Joel, I might challenge you on one thing there. I think what the Bible teaches us is that we are, in fact, born into sin. You know, David said about himself, in sin did my mother conceive me. So what the Bible teaches us is that when Adam fell and Eve fell, we all fell with them. We inherited from them a human nature that had been contaminated by sin. It's like a virus that is generational. It's just passed on from one generation to the next. But I do appreciate you bringing up Genesis 3, Joe, because what it illustrates is that it's a matter of choice. You know, Satan could dangle the fruit in front of Eve, but until she took it and she ate it, there was no sin. There was no fall. So Satan will dangle temptation of all kinds against us. That'll include sexual temptation as well as other temptations, and that's what James is talking about in James 1. But if we resist it, if we resist the temptation, we don't yield to it, it is when lust has conceived that it gives birth to sin. How does lust conceive? It's something we want to do that we know is wrong, and we fight against it, we resist it for a time, and then suddenly we just collapse and we give in. That's when lust has conceived and it gives birth to sin, and that's the ongoing fight of every believer. All right, Joe, listen, I appreciate your call very much. Now, we got Dan Gainor coming up at the quarter after, so we need to protect some time for him. I want to get a couple of more sound bites in if we can. Let's go to Alan Dershowitz. This is clip number 4. And Alan Dershowitz, Harvard emeritus, one of the leading legal beagles in the land. He's been a fierce defender of Donald Trump, not because politically he is aligned with Donald Trump. He actually voted for Hillary Clinton. So he's not a Trump guy, but he is a Constitution guy. And he's saying, look, the way these prosecutors are going after Trump is they are abandoning what ought to be their stock in trade, which is civil rights. Clip 4, let's listen.
I think we are moving closer and closer to the surveillance state where phone calls are tapped, where emails are secured without a real basis. I think prosecutors should not be seeking wiretaps on lawyers' offices and search warrants and subpoenas for lawyers' email files unless they have very substantial evidence of very serious crimes. Campaign contributions don't qualify for the kind of crime that should justify the wiretapping of a lawyer. Remember that when you wiretap a lawyer, you're wiretapping his clients, and you're wiretapping conversations between the lawyer and the client, and you're searching for emails. And where is the American Civil Liberties Union on this? Where are civil libertarians? We live in such a partisan atmosphere of get Trump at any cost that we're prepared to give up our basic civil liberties in exchange for getting Trump.
You know, and the ACLU should have been all over that raid of Michael Cohen's law office. You just don't do that. You don't get subpoenas. Don't get warrants to invade a lawyer's office and take the files that he has for all of his clients. Every one of them represents information that's protected by attorney-client privilege. Just not something that's done. It's a violation of the Fourth Amendment, and ACLU is completely, absolutely silent in all of that, and that is Dershowitz's claim. We're getting closer to a surveillance state. ACLU is not complaining about surveillance. As long as it's surveillance of Donald Trump and his campaign team, ACLU could care less about surveillance. And so what Alan Dershowitz is saying, look, we are losing our constitutional soul. I mean, the hate for Trump, it is so rabid, it is so vitriolic, It is so intense. Jeff, could you wake that up for me again? Mm-hmm. It is so intense that they're losing, that the ACLU and people on the left, they're losing their minds and they're no longer thinking constitutionally about what's going on. So good call on the part of Alan Dershowitz. You know, and he says, look, when you they didn't wiretap him, they got a pen register, so they didn't actually listen in on his conversations. That was a major error that NBC made in reporting that story. The error was evident almost to me. It took them 4 hours to correct that error. By the way, there's a gubernatorial primary in Ohio tomorrow, and AFA Action, Rob Chambers, the vice president for AFA Action, has endorsed Mary Taylor in that race because she is a full-spectrum conservative, according to AFA Action. She's always been pro-life, supported the Ohio marriage amendment, opposes amnesty for illegal immigrants, has always had an A rating from the NRA. And on amnesty is where she parts company from Mike DeWine, voted 15 times in Congress for amnesty. Be right back.
Here's Twyla Brace, president of CCHF, with today's Health Freedom Minute.
Thousands of Medicare rules must be obeyed by doctors and hospitals to avoid penalties and jail time. Medicare recently issued a nearly 2,000-page proposed payment rule. Who can read these rules or follow them? James Madison, one of our nation's founding fathers, said, "It will be of little avail to the people that the laws are made by men of their own choice, if the laws be so voluminous that they cannot be read, or so incoherent that they cannot be understood." End quote. This Medicare rule is voluminous, complex, and written not by men of our own choosing, but by unelected bureaucrats. Let's put an end to regulatory rulemaking.
Learn more about protecting your healthcare choices. Sign up for the CCHF Weekly E-News Update at cchfreedom.org. That's cchfreedom.org.
Since the day the American Family Association began asking you to sign a petition urging the cancellation of 13 Reasons Why, Netflix has made some changes. They've added disclaimers before episodes and even a link to a suicide prevention hotline number. This is progress, but it's not enough. If you have signed the petition, thank you. If you haven't, please do. Netflix continues to ignore our request for a meeting to discuss the dangers of their show. And they're still going forward with the release of Season 2 of this dangerous program. Too many teens have taken their own lives after watching 13 Reasons Why, a program which seems to suggest suicide as a viable option. Your signature and prayers could help convince Netflix to reconsider their social responsibility. Even one more teen suicide would be infinitely too many. Please read and sign the Netflix petition at afa.net.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Howdy and welcome back to Focal Point American Family Radio. Doing my best to ignore my broadcast.
That's probably a good thing.
Yeah, you can go further that way. Anyway, glad to have you back. Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on Conservative Talk Radio. And you are listening to the American Family Radio Network. I want to welcome back to our decision maker line a frequent guest on this program, Dan Gainor, the Vice President for Business and Culture at the Media Research Center. Dan, welcome back to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Well, it's a pleasure to be back. And I think there's just a few things going on in the world, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, things just seem to be just going absolutely crazy. You know, Dan, we were talking last week. MRC's done great work in kind of exposing the bias, the censorship in the social media, Twitter, Facebook, and so forth. And I just want to mention this story to you and just ask if you have any response to it. I covered this story earlier today where there is a conservative individual by the name of Jamie Glazov, and he follows Islam, and he got banned by Twitter for hateful conduct. But his hateful conduct was to quote from the Quran, quoted a verse from the Quran and another statement of Muhammad's from the Hadith, and Twitter tagged that as hate speech. So that just kind of, I just found that a little bit humorous. He finally got his credentials back, but they didn't not even seem to realize the way they're categorizing these fundamental Islamic texts?
Well, I think what's happened there is they've got this. This is one of the problems the conservatives need to sort out. I think this is probably an AI, a artificial intelligence action. Some of the things that are in the Quran and the Hadith are actually pretty bloody about killing people who disagree with them. And if you quote that, then all it takes is either the AI to notice it, or somebody may have alerted on it. That whole process, we've got a process now that is very complicated for people to grasp, and it's sort of skewed against the right three different ways. One is that the left knows how to group alert on content that the right puts out, and when you do that, when you do that, then it gets appealed to people. And we even saw Mark Zuckerberg honestly admit this. He said they're hire from liberal Silicon Valley, so you run into employees who are liberal, and then a lot of these organizations, Twitter in particular, the groups that they deal with for content are majority liberal. Twitter has 25 members of its Trust and Safety Council in the U.S. 12 are openly liberal, one's conservative.
Well, I'd like you to respond to this, if you would, Dan, as well. Dan Gainor from the Media Research Center. I think a lot of these liberals, they only talk to each other, they only listen to each other, they only consume news that's processed through a liberal worldview. So they're really in this very insulated bubble, which is completely different. The atmosphere in there is completely different than the atmosphere in the rest of America. So they're just simply not in touch with what ordinary Americans think and believe. And so because they only talk to each other, they think that their view must be correct because it's the only view that they ever hear. So they think they're just being fair, they're just being even-handed, they're just being neutral. They don't even recognize their own blatant bias.
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for that. Part of it is, yes, they may hear other opinions, but they just discount them so much. You can live in the liberal world, though, read morning and see evening news, read morning news, go to work, come home and watch the TV, or go to see a movie or listen to music, and never once encounter a conservative opinion on absolutely anything. Conservatives have had to learn for the last 50 years that we live in a liberal pop culture. So we see news that is biased against us. We read, books and listen to music and go to see movies and watch TV, and it's all biased against us. And so it's impossible to be in a bubble in America as a conservative if you embrace any media at all.
Well, the interesting thing to me, Dan, too, is that we as conservatives, we do not mind at all mixing it up with liberals. In fact, my favorite callers to this program are adversarial callers. I love to discuss the issues that they care about and interact and give them information to consider and respond to their questions and their challenges. But the left doesn't seem to have that same interest in dialogue.
Well, it's because we're wrong in their minds. They don't, and we're so wrong that we're not worth even convincing. We should just be kicked to the curb. For myself, I discovered this in Facebook. I spent a couple decades in journalism, so when I started my Facebook account, I had a lot of former coworkers on there. And, of course, because it's journalism, the vast majority of them were liberal. And over time, almost all of them have blocked me on Facebook because they don't want to have anything to do with somebody who's conservative.
Even if it's somebody who's been a friend. That's just kind of remarkable and kind of an insight into the heart of people who fancy themselves the paragons of tolerance and diversity. Well, and apparently not enough room in their diversity for a guy with the values that you share. Dan, a couple of other things I want to talk about. We followed very closely on this program the saga with Alfie Evans over in the UK. What's your take, those of you that follow this thing over at MRC, what's the take on how balanced the media was in handling this, particularly because at the same time you had the royal baby born. Everybody was agog over the royal baby. So how did the media's coverage of Alfie Evans compare to their coverage of the royal baby?
Yeah, the media are wildly hypocritical when it comes to babies. When you get royal babies, and by that I mean not just people who are legitimate royals, like in this case, but Beyonce and her children, or anybody who's a celeb, if they want their baby, then that's a royal baby. We're going to celebrate it. So in this case, the royal baby got 10 times the coverage that poor Alfie Evans got. And what we also saw across media was that, generally speaking, the media didn't really write about this issue until it was done. And that's a very clear and deliberate thing on their part, because if they write about it while he was still in the hospital, still alive, and could be saved, then they might actually create momentum and cause that. So then they write about it afterwards. See, we covered the story. No, you didn't. If this had been something they cared about, that they wanted to prevent, they would have been all over it. Said, well, this is a crisis. We're going to act now while he's still alive. They didn't want to.
You know, speaking of this kind of bias that you have, I'm looking here at an article that indicates that 88% of Harvard faculty say that Trump has done a very poor job as president. 88%. Now, the American people are almost evenly divided, Dan, on this. It's about 50% think he's doing a good job, according to Rasmussen. 49% don't. But if the nation is evenly divided and the Harvard faculty is running 88% to 12 or whatever it is, they clearly are not in touch with the thinking of ordinary Americans.
Well, and that would go back to my point. They don't think we're right. They think we're wrong about basically everything. And you see it. I do a lot of reading of the left. You see it. Their commentary is just so dismissive of ordinary Americans. You see it in pop culture. You see it, in movies or on the news. And so when you get a poll like that, they just don't care about the results. They think we're wrong. They'll eventually convince us. When in fact, today we got huge news. The unemployment rate is down to 3.9%, the lowest it's been since the year 2000. So I've been in this job almost 14 years. I've never seen unemployment this low in this job, and that should crush the news tonight. And we both know it won't.
Yeah. You know, one other question I have. You know, we look as conservatives. We look at things like hard work and merit. We look at those things as essential qualities that they're conservative values. And yet, and yet, Dan, at the same time, we seem to have the terms racism and white supremacy being redefined all the time, being redefined in such a way that they include basically every white person in America. And we have this program, Quantico, and according to some of the information I've looked at MRC, they're kind of redefining white supremacy in kind of a strange way.
Yeah, they did an episode. Of course, they're going undercover in Quantico. It's one of these typical TV dramas where the villains are going to typically be white supremacists of some sort. They're going to go undercover in a group of white supremacists, and they find this rich guy, billionaire, they think is backing them. They've got this plan to kill off the poor. They're going to weaponize tuberculosis and dump it into poor areas in America. And so they go back and find an old video, and they're all astonished because he starts off saying, dream of a world based on merit, hard work, a great nation free of its parasites. And it's like, well, wait a second. When are hard work and merit bad? How is that? You start this off as this idea that basic core values, Protestant work ethic, is bad.
Yeah. Well,
but this is Hollywood, where any typical American value is bad.
One last thing, Dan, got about a minute and a half left. 63 conservative organizations sent a letter complaining about bias on social media, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. And your boss, Brent Bozell, was the one I think that authored this letter. Our president, Tim Wildman, signed it. So tell us what's the essence of this problem as they explain what conservatives have encountered on social media.
But this was intended to be a statement of general principle, something that the whole conservative movement could stand behind. We want greater transparency of how they enforce hate speech. We got a little of that from Facebook recently, but it was disturbing, some of what we got. We want not just a seat at the table, we want an equal seat at the table. We want the clarity on the hate speech. And ultimately, this is a nation that's been around for more than 200 years, clearly and defined ideas about free speech, traditional free speech. We don't have any rights on these sites to be on them, but the ideas and the ideals of our free speech and freedom of religion should carry through online, and that's something conservative movement is in agreement on. We shouldn't be redoing the idea of free speech just because a bunch of safe space snowflakes are bothered by people that they don't agree with.
Our guest has been Dan Gainor. He is the Vice President for Business and Culture at Media Research Center. You can find out more about the work they do by going to newsbusters.org. Newsbusters.org. They do a great job of monitoring the media, particularly detecting bias in the media. Great resource. I use it every day in my show prep. Dan, as always, great to have you on the program. Have a great weekend, my friend, and God bless you.
God bless you as well, and everybody listening. Take care.
Thank you, Dan. We'll be right back with more content. Stay with us.
Nearly 1 in 4 pregnancies in America will end in abortion. The Ministry of Preborn provides free ultrasounds for abortion-minded women throughout America. When a mother sees her baby on an ultrasound and hears the baby's heartbeat, she's 80% more likely to keep her baby.
They introduced me to my child for the first time through an ultrasound. I was able to see this life growing inside of me, hear the heartbeat, and nothing else mattered at that point. I wasn't afraid anymore. I got to meet my child for the first time, and it changed everything. I was a mother to be.
Your gift of $140 will cover the cost of 5 ultrasounds. All donations are tax deductible, and 100% of your gift goes to saving babies. To donate, dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby, or donate securely at preborn.com. Your love can save a life.
Here on American Family Radio, this is David Wolin with Haven Ministries, inviting you to anchor your day in God's Word. It always breaks my heart when I see it happen. The parent who is too busy for a child who just wants a little bit of their attention. And I'm no exception. Sometimes as parents we can't simply stop what we're doing. But how often is it only a cell phone or a TV show that's getting our top priority? Aren't you glad that God isn't like that with us? When we come to God like the psalmist did in Psalm 102, saying, "Don't turn away from me in my time of distress. Bend down to listen and answer me when I call to you." In those moments, God is never too busy to be bothered with us. He's never too preoccupied for His children. Anchor Devotional can help you spend time with Him daily. You can get it in print monthly. Visit getanchor.com.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Video segments of today's program will be posted at afr.net and on the Focal Point Facebook page. You'll also find the best collection of Brian's resources on our Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, be among the very first every morning to find out what the day's show will be about. Just follow Brian at Brian J. Fisher.
Brian J. Fisher.
Howdy, welcome back to Free for All Friday on Focal Point American Family Radio. We get to our phone calls here in about 15 minutes. We'll take calls on anything you want to talk about that's been in the news this past week. Looking at an article by Virginia Hale on Breitbart, exaggerated feelings of moral superiority, end quote, make liberals vulnerable to believing fake news, according to a study which looked at stories relating to Brexit and U.S. President Donald Trump. Researchers at Nottingham Trent University found liberals and conservatives are equally likely to believe untrue news stories that correspond to their worldview and dismiss factual information that undermines, but their reasons for doing it differ. While right-wingers, quote, followed their gut instinct, quote, end quote, in order to judge the veracity of news, high levels of collective narcissism, strong belief in the righteousness of their ideology and of others who share it affected how liberals responded to stories. So their collective narcissism inclines them to believe false stories, and their exaggerated sense of moral superiority make it very difficult to disabuse them of stuff that they believe that is just plain wrong. You know, we had a major episode, a major example of fake news when NBC produced a story saying that Michael Cohen's phones had been tapped, or I think it was Michael Cohen's, or was it his doctor, that their phones had been tapped. Phones hadn't been tapped. They had developed what's called a pen register, which shows everybody he called or who called him, but they had no capacity to listen or to jot down or to record the phone calls, and they had to issue a retraction. I talked about this earlier in the program, had to issue a retraction some time later. Now, one of the stories that we touched on just briefly was the appointment of Richard Grenell to be the next ambassador to Germany. This guy is an open homosexual. He is an advocate of the radical homosexual agenda. This is a guy that I went toe-to-toe with back in 2012 when Mitt Romney nominated him or appointed him to be his spokesman on foreign policy affairs. And it was enough of an issue that CNN invited me on. This is clip R2. CNN invited me on to debate this issue with a member of the Log Cabin Republicans. That's a group of Republicans that are homosexuals and promote the homosexual agenda. And I was on there to defend my point of view. Wasn't a good idea to make Rick Grenell Mitt Romney's foreign policy spokesman. And just as I don't think it's a good idea to make him our ambassador to Germany, here's how that conversation went on CNN.
Romney's decision to hire this openly gay man, Richard Grenell, as his foreign policy spokesperson has one conservative radio host fuming. We're talking about Brian Fisher. Fisher gave Romney a political lashing, tweeting and writing this on his blog. The message Governor Romney appears to be sending to the pro-family community through his Grenell appointment is drop dead. Brian Fisher joins me now via Skype, along with the executive director of Log Cabin Republicans, R. Clark Cooper. Brian, let's go ahead and start with you. Clearly, you feel strongly that Romney, as you put it on your blog, quote, stepped on a landmine. Why?
Well, a real issue for the evangelical base, the social conservative base, is where does Governor Romney stand on the issues of values, the issues of marriage, the issues of human sexuality? And this, I think, is an alarming signal for the governor to send. Particularly, he did this right after Richard Land of the Southern Baptist Convention endorsed him. Robert Jeffress of Dallas First Baptist Church endorsed him. The National Organization for Marriage endorsed him. And then right on the heels of that, Governor Romney picks as the face of his campaign on national security and foreign policy a man who is not just a homosexual, but is a homosexual activist who is actively working on the behalf of homosexual marriage. That's a great concern to people in the evangelical base.
Do you believe that openly gay people should not be hired in the GOP?
Well, the real issue here is for Governor Romney and what he thinks about homosexual behavior. His church, you know, my complaint about Governor Romney all the way along is not that he's Mormon, but that he's not Mormon enough. Now, according to the Encyclopedia of Mormonism, the Mormon Church believes that homosexual behavior is sinful and that homosexual acts are offensive to God. So the question that needs to be asked of Governor Romney, do you agree with the teaching of your church? If you do, that homosexual acts are offensive to God, then why have you made the face of your campaign someone who engages in conduct that your own church says is offensive to God?
But Brian,
if you don't agree with your church, then how can you expect the evangelical base to support you?
But we're talking about the separation of church and state here. Isn't that a good thing? Isn't that what Americans want? They want a president that isn't going to make decisions based on his religious beliefs. He's going for, in his words, the most qualified person.
But, Kira, you cannot separate religious liberty from the issue of the homosexual agenda. In fact, the homosexual agenda represents the single greatest threat to religious liberty and freedom of association in America today. And Clark from the Log Cabin Republicans ought to know that. He was an Eagle Scout. Boy Scouts ran into enormous trouble on religious liberty and associational issues because they would not allow homosexuals to serve as scoutmasters. He knows the threat.
Clark,
that
I'll let you step in.
Lobby represents
Clark?
to freedom of association.
Sure. Rick's orientation had nothing to do with the hiring process.
Let me,
well, my response to that would be, Clark, if his hiring had nothing to do with homosexuality, why did so many homosexual groups like the Log Cabin Republicans come out and celebrate this appointment if it had nothing to do with homosexuality and normalizing homosexual behavior?
Go ahead, Clark.
One's political affiliation and one's religion are choices. One's orientation is not a choice.
Brian, let me ask you, I mean, and just off of what Clark is saying and what you have said when we start talking about background and qualifications, I mean, if you take a look here at Grenell's resume, we're talking over 2 decades of experience at the local, state, federal level, appointed by George W. Bush in 2001 as Director of Communications. He's got a master's degree from Harvard. Why would this not qualify him to be a part of Mitt Romney's campaign?
Well, the reality is, Kira, that Richard Grenell is not the only qualified individual out there that Governor Romney could have chosen. He knows about his past. He knows about his sexual preferences. He knows about his activism on behalf of the homosexual agenda. He made a deliberate, intentional choice to pick this man as the face of his campaign on national security issues. Out of all the qualified applicants he could have chose, he picked a man who was a homosexual activist. That's the thing that's sending off alarm bells in the evangelical community because, as I mentioned, I share with Clark, our concern is for liberty. Our concern is for religious liberty, and we recognize the threat that homosexual activism, the homosexual agenda imposes on religious liberty, and
Brian,
that's our concern. Where's Governor Romney at?
And Brian, I just thought that was interesting. You thought Bolton did a great job and Grenell was his spokesperson.
Well, the point here is that personnel is policy. Everybody in D.C. says that. Personnel is policy. When Governor Romney picks somebody who's an activist homosexual and puts him in a prominent position, he's sending a shout out, it seems to me, to the homosexual lobby. And it's absurd, Kira, to say this is not about sexual orientation, sexual preference, because I wouldn't be talking to a representative of the log cabin Republicans if they didn't recognize that this is a big gain for the homosexual lobby, and that's why we're concerned.
Brian, y'all got to be careful because you're starting to sound like George Wallace. Segregation today, segregation tomorrow. Be careful because you're going to be less in the dustbin of history, buddy.
Clark.
Well, Clark, there's no equivalence between sexual orientation and race. People are born into a race. Sexual orientation is a matter of choice and preference.
And that was the end of that interview. I'd say the same things today. If we had the same interview about whether Rick Grenell should have been picked by our president to be the ambassador to Germany, would have the same answers to the same questions. Now, let's grab a clip number 1. This is David Brody of CBN interviewing Mike Pence, and they're talking here about what goes on in the White House during the week. Let's listen.
Prayer alive and well in the White House as well, not just on the National Day of Prayer. We've heard stories. There's prayer going on inside that White House.
There's prayer going on a regular basis in this White House, and it's one of the most meaningful things to me is whether it's public meetings or not. I've lost count of the number of times that the president's nudged me or nudged another member of the cabinet and said, let's start this meeting with prayer. He's someone who really believes in the power of prayer and in the importance of faith in American life. You saw that in high relief at the White House today, but it's not just on the National Day of Prayer.
Not just on the National Day of Prayer. You know, and again, I said this yesterday, the more I listen to President Trump speak, the more Christian he sounds to me. I think God is doing a pretty great work in this guy's heart. He's now openly using the terms Jesus Christ. His feature story yesterday, introducing the Day of Prayer, was about a man who came to faith in Jesus Christ, and that's what the president emphasized. Now, I've got got several clips here from the Democratic, kind of highlights from the Democratic pantheon. First of all, we're going to listen to Michelle Obama. This is a clip from 2 days ago, and listen to how Michelle Obama sees herself. You know, we all thought that President Obama had a problem with narcissism. Let's see what you think about his wife.
And we have such high hopes for you. See, I'm not one of those doubters. I know you have everything it takes to succeed. I know that you are me. And if I can be standing here as your forever First Lady.
All right, Michelle introducing herself now to the world as America's forever First Lady. Now, Nancy Pelosi could be in a little bit of trouble. Here is clip number 9. This is from NBC affiliate in San Francisco. This is her home turf.
San Francisco's Nancy Pelosi has told the Boston Globe that she will run for Speaker of the House if the Democrats win a majority of seats in the midterm election. Pelosi, of course, the very first woman speaker in history. This may not be good news for Democrats. Republicans use Pelosi as a cudgel in their ads to convince people not to vote for Democrats, and they're not wrong. We might like Nancy Pelosi in the Bay Area, but America doesn't. Things that are more popular than Nancy Pelosi, according to an NBC Wall Street Journal poll, include the NRA, current Speaker Paul Ryan, even Donald Trump. Among all Americans, Donald Trump is far more liked than Nancy Pelosi.
Whoa, in San Francisco, no less. Now, last clip before we go to your phone calls, this is Hillary Clinton got another explanation for why she lost in 2016.
You may be the only presidential candidate since World War II that actually had to stand up and say, I am a capitalist. And you did. Did it hurt you?
Probably. I mean, you know, it's hard. It's hard to know, but I mean, if you're in the Iowa caucuses and 41% of Democrats are socialists or self-described socialists, and I'm asked, are you a capitalist? And I say yes, but with appropriate regulation and appropriate accountability, you know, that probably gets lost in the, oh my gosh, she's a capitalist.
Well, the reason Hillary had to say it is nobody believes it, that you are a capitalist, not a socialist. Back with your phone calls when we come back.
Sometimes you don't see it, but God's always at work in His kingdom. And that's why I love to share encouraging stories about Christians the Lord is using to grow His kingdom. I'm Charles Morris. Won't you join me on the next Haven Today in a series this week called Christians You Should Know?
Haven Today, weekday mornings at 4:30 Central on American Family Radio. Listen online at afr.net.
Exposing Washington with Walker Wildman.
So who is responsible for the dysfunction in Washington? That's what we're going to be discussing today.
We have become one of the most litigious societies on the planet.
The goal of this show is to bring clarity to the news coming out of Washington, D.C., and to expose the deception that has plagued our nation's capital for decades.
Exposing Washington.
Each Saturday at 2:30 p.m. Central.
On American Family Radio.
Who says you can't have your cake and eat it too? If you're like a lot of people, you would like to support the culture-changing efforts of the American Family Association. But there's the very pressing reality that your income must meet your current needs as well as act as seed for future income, either for the short term or for life. A charitable gift annuity might be your answer. A charitable gift annuity offers a unique method for both planning ahead for permanent income and supporting the work of the American Family Association. An AFA Foundation representative will walk you through the details of creating a charitable gift annuity, allowing you to decide if a charitable gift annuity is right for your individual financial situation. Connect with us today by calling 800-326-4543, extension 345, or visit us online at afafoundation.net.
It's Friday. That means on Exploring the Word, it is Fire Away Friday at 3 o'clock Central Time, where Alex and I will join you as you call in and ask your question. This is Bert Harper. Get ready to fire away. Thank you for listening to Exploring the Word, especially on Fire Away Friday.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Focal Point, Brian Fisher.
Howdy, and welcome back to the last segment of this week's broadcasting of Focal Point on American Family Radio. You guys are getting that fishing motion. You're kind of doing it in unison now.
Yeah.
Starting to think that the Rockettes, this is, we're getting something working here. Anyway, let me get focused here on what we are here to do instead of being distracted by my hyperactive team. Let's grab clip number 11. Oh, first of all, the number to call, by the way, Free for All Friday, talk about anything that's been in the news this past week, is 888-589-8840. 888-589-8840. Give us a call. Now, very quickly, let's go to clip number 11. This is Debbie White Dove. Now, what is significant about Debbie White Dove is that she is an honest-to-goodness, genuine descendant of Pocahontas. Pocahontas being Donald Trump's favorite nickname for Elizabeth Warren. So here's what she had to say about Senator Warren.
I respect Senator Warren as a U.S. Senator, but I just wish she'd take the DNA test. And if she took the DNA test, then that would end a lot of this controversy.
Yeah.
And if she was part American Indian, I'd be the first one to welcome her into our heritage.
Well, amen. Maybe she's related to Pocahontas, too. I mean, weird things have happened. Why do you think she won't take the DNA test? It doesn't cost much.
I know. Maybe she's afraid she's not.
Bingo!
It's not right. It's offensive that she doesn't take it.
Well, she's not afraid that she's not. She knows that she's not. That's why she won't take the test. All right.
Yeah, aren't those DNA tests to find your heritage and your family roots real popular now?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they've come down quite a bit in cost.
Yeah, it's all the rage now. All right, let's go to the phones, 888-589-8840, Free for All Friday. Let's start by talking to Rodney in Iowa. Rodney, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hey, Brian, how you doing?
Good.
Oh, we love Family American Radio. We listen to you in the morning. We listen to Frank Gaffney at night before we go to bed.
Great. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Hey, I was watching C-SPAN this morning. They had David Horowitz on there. And when he said that Donald Trump wasn't a Nazi or a bigot, man, he was met with fury from the Democrats. But if you really do your homework on Mar-a-Lago, see, Mar-a-Lago's in West Palm Beach, and he had to fight the state of Florida to buy that because he was going to turn it into a community center for blacks, gays, and Jews to meet. And that's a good thing for gays. You know, I'm not for gay marriage and all that. But anyway, so they could congregate and meet and talk. And I'll tell you what, he was met with fire and fury from the state of Florida for doing that.
Yeah.
And,
well, yeah, go ahead.
But he fought him in court, and he won.
Yeah. Well, you know, and Donald Trump's gotten a lot of hostility for a long time. He has to fight through a lot of hostility almost no matter what he does. Good preparation for being the president of the United States. Well, great, Rodney. Thank you for that. Let's grab a call from Gavin in Texas. Welcome, Gavin. What's on your mind?
Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me on the show. I just want to let you know I'm a first-time listener. I found your radio station by accident, actually, and tuned in.
Great.
I want to touch on something that you mentioned earlier in the show about the education unemployment in California.
Yes, sir.
One thing that I've stood by in my, I want to mention something. I'm 19 years old. I'm a firm Republican. I've been Republican for all my life. But one thing that I've stood by that I see that would lead to that is the sense of entitlement. People seem so entitled nowadays that they don't feel like they have to get an education. And that's more so for millennials, especially the community there, if you will, in California, with the larger cities, Los Angeles, San Francisco, no matter what it is. They have this sense of entitlement where they don't need to get an education, essentially. They want things handed to them. Mm-hmm. And, of course, they're going to be lower than any other state in the United States because they have such a large population there that does have this frame of mind. And I do agree with you that illegal immigration is a driving cause behind it, but I also am a firm believer that the millennials, that the younger generation of people who want hand-me-downs, or handouts, they aren't contributing. Of course, they're not going to get an education when they can get mommy or daddy to hand them whatever they want.
Or get the federal government to loan them money for college, and then when they get upside down, they're going to expect the federal government to just forgive their loans, wipe it off the books. So again, it's that entitlement mentality. You're exactly right, Gavin. I was talking to Dan Gainor earlier in the program, and he mentioned the Judeo-Christian work ethic. And that is the single thing that built America into the strongest and most prosperous nation on the face of the globe, was the Judeo-Christian work ethic. When it's called the Judeo-Christian work ethic because that's exactly what it is. It's a work ethic that's rooted and grounded in the Word of God, the Judeo-Christian tradition. That's what Paul says in Ephesians 4. Work with your own hands to supply your own needs and to have something to share with others. That's the whole essence of the American economy. There's no entitlement in that. You work with your own hands. We talked about that yesterday when Jesus asked the guy that was laying paralyzed next to the pool of Siloam, do you want to be healed? You know, at first glance, it sounds like a silly question, but it ties right into what Gavin is saying. If he's healed, then all of a sudden he cannot depend on charity and welfare and food stamps and all that kind of thing. Now all of a sudden he's going to have to work with his own hands and to provide for his own needs. And Jesus said, you better think about that before I go through with this. All right, Gavin, great call. Thank you for that. You know, and isn't that encouraging call to hear from Gavin, 19 years old, in California. Conservatives there do exist. All right, let's go to Kim in Hickory, North Carolina. Kim, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hey, about 6 months ago, I heard a blurb that Kanye West said that he was interested in running for president. Now, all we need are the Kardashians in the White House. And just let me say that if they're grooming him for that, I don't think I can live here anymore if that happens. I think I'll just have to move elsewhere.
Yeah.
Just something to think about. I heard him say it, so
we'll
see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Here's what I would say, Kim. The chances of Kanye West becoming the next president of the United States are better than the chances of Donald Trump becoming president. Oh, wait a minute. Anyway, chances are just about the same. You know, and it's interesting, Kim, because, you know, the people on the left are wigging out over Kanye West. And the reason that they are wigging out is because he's sounding more conservative. He's quoting Thomas Sowell, the smartest man in the world, in my judgment. And they're calling him mentally disturbed. It's interesting to me that if somebody disagrees with them, there's no room in their world for an honest disagreement. You just look at this differently than I do. If you look at this differently than we do as liberals, there's got to be something wrong with you. And you are not just wrong, you are evil to believe what you do. So Kanye West is going to have a pretty steep hill to climb to become president. Let's go to Tom in Searcy, Arkansas. Tom, welcome. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I had a couple comments. One of them was on Mueller investigation.
Yes, sir.
Where is Jeff Sessions?
Well,
why has he not got involved in this by now?
Well, you got a lot of people asking the same question because there are things that he should, by rights, he should have stepped in and done a long time ago. In other words, he appointed Rod Rosenstein, so Rod Rosenstein owes his position. Well, no, he didn't appoint him. Trump did, but he works for Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions is Rod Rosenstein's boss. So when he saw that Rod Rosenstein was failing completely to exercise any meaningful supervision of this out-of-control snipe hunt, Jeff Sessions had a responsibility to step in and set Rosenstein straight on that. Look, you got to reel in Mueller. He's gone off the reservation. He's gone way outside the perimeters that you established for him. You got to rein him in. And Jeff Sessions apparently did not do that. So a lot of people asking the same questions, Tom. Where is Jeff Sessions? I've still been a defender of Jeff Sessions. I think he's an upright man, a righteous man. I believe his motives are pure. I think he's a Southern gentleman, and probably a Southern gentleman to a fault. That may be the thing that's tripping him up, because Southern gentlemen are patient, they're kind, they have tolerance, and maybe a little too much of that Southern gentleman is kind of handicapping Jeff Sessions. All right, Tim, that is a great question. I wish I had a better answer for you. Let's go to Jim in Yellville, Arkansas. Jim, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hey, brother. Let me say this first, that we're not to hate the homosexuals. The Bible is very clear to love all people, but then it's also clear that it says that their foolish heart is darkened to do the things they ought not. But to parallel this country with what's happening out of the old covenant, to where the different kings would come into power and this guy would do what's right in the eyes of God and the country would be blessed, and then the other one, the son come along and do what's evil in the eyes of God and be cursed. And until the people, the true believers of this country, takes part in our political arena and make their voices known, it's not going to change at all. So I would like to encourage the believers of this country to contact their senators, the president, the dog next door, and let them know what you feel, and then we'll see this country start going back into the area that it
Absolutely. Great note to end on, Jim. Thank you for that. Bow low before God, stand tall before man, stand in the gap where God's put you. Never forget we're fighting a winnable war.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
Announcing 3 new episodes of Ryan DeFrades' Secret Agent. These animated half-hour episodes will entertain children. That's right! Ryan DeFrades is a secret agent with a whole lot to learn, and he insists on working alone until he's